Good evening, everybody. You all here? So welcome for those who are joining the meeting this evening. We encourage you to turn on your videos. We have a small group so far tonight, so we can have a more intimate conversation. We generally prefer people having their videos on, and we're just going to wait a minute or two until we see if we can get a few more people to join. All right, I don't see anyone else joining. Why don't we get started here? Oh, someone else is just coming in. Okay, why don't we get started? Welcome everyone. We're glad that you all could join this evening. As we had discussed at the previous meeting, this is in office hours, and it's really an opportunity for you all to ask us questions about the alternatives development process, and where we're going with the project. I think this is meant to be very informal. We have a bunch of staff folks here to be able to answer questions. Unless we get more folks to join, I think we're all just going to stay in one group together. I'd like to propose that we run this. We first maybe start with introductions, and all of us can go around and say who we are, and then we can jump in and start asking. You guys can start asking questions, and we can ask you for some feedback as well. So again, if those of you joining would like to turn on your videos, we certainly would appreciate it. We like seeing who you are and seeing your faces. It's more personal. So I will start. I'm Matt Ramey with Ramey Associates. I think a lot of you have, I recognize a lot of your names. I think a lot of you have seen me throughout the process. Myself, Simran, and Melissa are with Ramey Associates, and we're helping the city with the general plan update. Simran, you want to go ahead? You're on mute.
Hi everyone, I'm Simran Malhotra. I'm with Ramey Associates, and looking forward to having a discussion with you on the alternatives today.
Okay, Melissa.
Hi everyone, my name is Melissa Stark. I'm a planner at Ramey Associates, and I was actually also born and raised in Thousand Oaks, and I'm still very intimately familiar with the community. So I'm happy to be here tonight, and happy that you all could join us.
Okay, Michael, why don't you go next, and then we'll move through city staff.
I'm Michael Forbes. I'm the Deputy Community Development Director for Thousand Oaks, and I'm the project manager for the general plan update. Thank you for being with us tonight.
I'm just going to go across my screen. Tabitha?
Oops. Hi, everyone. I'm Tabitha. I am the assistant planner with the City of Thousand Oaks, and I'm on the general plan team. And thank you for joining us.
Okay, Kari.
Good evening. Kari Finley, I'm the planning division manager, and I'm part of the general plan team. And thanks again for joining us.
Ian.
Hi, I'm Ian. I'm a senior planner at Thousand Oaks as well, and I'm part of the general plan team.
Kristen.
Last but not least, I'm Kristen Rice, and I'm a senior planner and on the general plan team.
All right, now let's go. We definitely would love you all from the public to introduce yourself too. It's optional, so if you don't want to, that's okay. Andrew, nice to see you. Let's start with you.
Hey Matt, hello everybody. My name's Andrew. I'm an architect and obviously local resident. Just interested in this process and sort of collecting some intel in terms of potential future projects. So,
Andy?
Yeah, this is Andy Joe. I'm so glad to join this meeting. Until I took a look at the 2020. The new plan 2045 plan, and I'm so excited. So join the meeting and to hear more information about it. Thank you.
Okay, great. And if you guys could say when you introduce yourself, if you participated in last week's meeting or if you've read the briefing book, that would be helpful as well. Okay, Rosanna?
Hi, I'm Rosanna Guerra. I did participate in, I think it was the February 2nd briefing. I have looked over the briefing book, and so I have a couple of questions. My interests lie, I've been a Thousand Oaks resident since '93. My interests lie in really looking at what would be possible for the senior population, as well as the disabled and affordable housing. So that's where my interests lie. And I want to give a voice to that. So, and I'm involved with a couple of different nonprofit groups here in the community. So that's why I'm here, and that's what I want to get more information about. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Carl? Or Cal, sorry.
Cal. Yeah, I'm Cal Steinberg. I'm a local resident, a retired financial advisor. I've lived in the community over 40 years. Currently reside in the Newberry Park area. I did also sit in on the February 2nd session, and I'm interested in this process. I'm interested in making sure and hopefully see if we can retain the overall quality of this neighborhood and this community while we move forward.
Great, thank you. Pablo? Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Pablo Boucher. I am a new resident. I moved into the Thousand Oaks area about 5 months ago, and I'm interested to see what is the future for the city. I am a small business owner, and I moved from the San Fernando Valley, and like to see what is the future for our city.
All right, great. Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine. I am a student at Westlake High School, and I'm also on the Thousand Oaks Youth Commission, and I just want to learn more about how we can get this information out to youth in our community to get their perspective on the general plan, because it will affect us greatly if we do decide to come back to Thousand Oaks in the future.
Thanks, Catherine. Nice to see you again. Nicholas, are you there?
Yes. Hi, I'm Nick Rial. I'm a been a resident of Thousand Oaks for the last 3 years, and I am a member of the General Plan Advisory Committee. Sorry, I'm having some webcam problems. I was at the last meeting, had read the briefing book to prepare. I'm just here to see what sort of questions the rest of the community has, so I can get more perspectives from people who have lived here longer than I have.
Great, thanks. Valerie?
Sorry, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm a resident of Thousand Oaks and also a planner for the neighboring city. And so I want to get in some information about our general plan. And if there was room to consider in the general plan for a live-work type of residential structure. If there's something that we can discuss, can it be incorporated into the general plan as a possible solution to basically do a housing job balance and have another option for a residential unit?
Thanks, Valerie. Cindy?
Good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank you for the closed captioning. I really appreciate that. My name is Cindy Liu. I've lived in Thousand Oaks area, Newbury Park for almost 15 years. I'm interested in this process because I have 2 kids, and in 2045, they will be in their 30s in their prime working and earning window. I also have a child with a disability, so I definitely come with that lens. I'm the founder of an organization called We Belong 805, and it advocates for accessibility as well as, sorry, my phone is ringing, for people with disabilities. So I'm coming with that lens, certainly for with the lens of other marginalized communities like our senior populations. But I did attend the February 2nd meeting, and I learned so much from the questions that other community members ask. So I'm really here to listen as well. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. And I think Karen, you are last in our group.
I don't have a video on my laptop is in a docking station. I'm too lazy to take it out. So I have been a Thousand Oaks and Newbury Park resident for about 21 years in various parts of the city. I did attend the meeting last week. I was new to the whole process, not really, I had no idea that this has been being worked on for the last year and a half. Fortunately, I saw the notice in the Acorn and attended last week's meeting, have looked at the briefing book, and I do have about 5 questions I want to ask throughout tonight's meeting.
Great, well, we're glad you are newer to the process, you and Pablo, and we're really glad you all are joining us tonight, and that you, even though it's you know, you're later in the process, it's never too late. So we're glad you're here. So welcome, everyone. I want to, you know, I'm just going to kind of open this up, but I guess I'm wondering if anyone has any maybe first sort of broad questions about the purpose of alternatives and the reason why we're doing alternatives and how they were developed and how they're being used in the process. So I'm thinking maybe we could do sort of start big picture in terms of just a couple of questions or see if there's anything, and then maybe we can then dive into some more specific questions. And yeah, you can just, I can see everyone. So if you guys just, you know, raise your hand, wave for those of you who aren't, and Cal, I see you just 1 second. For those of you who aren't, can just talk when else is talking, and we'll call on you. We'll keep it really informal.
Okay, well, this is Karen. I'll jump in very quickly. Can you tell me what the, are any of these plans increasing the overall build out of residential units that were contained in the 90s plan, which I think were about 81,000 completely? Is there an increase? Do these alternatives offer an increase to this?
No, that's a really good question. No, none of them do. In fact, that's one of our organizing principles of the alternatives, is that we're staying within that residential cap overall. And so it's really about where they go and what they look like and how the residential units help achieve the vision that the community wants for the city. Okay, Cal?
My question is, if we're going back to the basics, is the basic guidelines that we're following, this 2,600 plus housing unit requirement from the state. I wonder how legal is that process, that we must accept that number and that's the only number that we have to design around? Seems to me that local communities should have a say on how they want to develop, how fast and in what form they want to develop. They already have a culture. They already have a understanding of where they're going, presumably. And it seems a little unconstitutional that they can mandate these universal numbers, which it's not clear how they come up with them. I'm sure there's some criteria that's, I assume, numerically equitable, but I'm not sure it's equitable from a lifestyle standpoint. So is there any flexibility that we have on modifying, adjusting, or changing that number?
To be blunt and direct, no, actually there isn't. Unfortunately, there are a lot of communities that are upset about what's called the RHNA number, the regional housing needs allocation. There are some people clearly in Thousand Oaks who are. There are communities throughout Southern California that are not happy with what their allocation is. Proportionally speaking, I know 2,600 seems like a lot for Thousand Oaks, but compared to other jurisdictions, it's actually, compared to the population, is actually pretty low. So in a sense, you guys were got off a little bit lighter. I mean, Ventura, which is a smaller community than you physically in terms of size and in terms of total population, has about 5,000, so they're almost double what you are, and some numbers are huge. You know, I wish I could say that there is flexibility with that, but these are just numbers that come down from the state, and there really isn't much there isn't anything that can be done about them, and the city needs to plan for it.
Matt, my question really, I assume that there's a formal allocation system, algorithm, or whatever they used. And my question is,
Correct.
Is that an algorithm in itself that can't be modified based on different factors, city factors? And more importantly, has anybody tested that? Has anybody legally approached that?
Yep. It's all been, there's a process. The numbers come down from the state to the region. The Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, allocates those. They develop a formula, and the formula is then discussed and analyzed. The numbers are put out as draft. The cities comment on those numbers. The numbers become final, then draft final, and then there's a protest process. The protest process has already occurred. None of the numbers were changed, and these are the numbers. So yes, it's been tested legally, and they're really, it is what it is. And there's other laws about, even the 2,600, the city can't reduce the development capacity, the residential development capacity in the city because of Senate Bill SB 330. So essentially this 81,000 number, which was in the 1996 general plan and tied to Measure E, 81,124, is actually the number that needs to maintain, the city needs to maintain that residential capacity in some form. Now, there is, the question becomes, how do you allocate that in a way that you preserve what's great about the community, but also address lots and lots of suggestions that other community members have had throughout the process about, Cindy brought this up, and Catherine brought this up about, how do people who are younger here be able to move back to the city, and what type of housing is there? I want to pause for 1 second because we have a couple new folks who have joined. And we'll let them introduce themselves here. So Mary, I see that you have joined. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and say whether you were at the February 2nd meeting and whether you've reviewed the briefing book.
Yes, I was at the February 2nd meeting, and I was participating in person for about a year when we were doing in person. And I tried to work with your interactive map, and I found it very difficult. I'm hoping some smart young person can, help me with this, because I would click on something and try to make a comment and save it. And then if I went to some other part on the map, that same comment that I already written would come up. And so I'm not sure how to navigate this. And I found it very confusing.
We're sorry about that. We are somewhat limited to technology, but that is certainly something we can go over. And I think Melissa can pull it up. Melissa Stark from my staff can pull it up, and we can walk through how to make those comments. So you can get a sense of that this evening, and you can see someone do that.
Well, I don't want to take everybody's time to do that. If possible, I'm up for a tutorial, but I don't need all these. I mean, these other people may have been able to make comments very readily. I don't know.
Yep. Well, why don't we can do that towards the end, and if folks want to stay on at the end, then and if we need to do, we have the ability to do breakout rooms. So a few folks, if it's too detailed, a few folks can go over and into a separate little room and talk. Becca, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Matt. I'm Becca with the Acorn newspaper. I'm just here to kind of listen in, hear what people's concerns are, and maybe learn a little something myself.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us, Becca. And I think that was, did I miss anyone who needed to introduce themselves? I think that is it.
I'm only able to stay on for about 30 minutes tonight. So I'll join your next one as well.
Okay, well, we can, if for some reason we don't get to the map question, we can have someone get in touch with you and make sure that you can give comments, because we tried to give a lot of ways to give comments, and we want the feedback. Okay, Karen, I saw you waving your arm there.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go back to my list of questions here. I did get, oh, shoot, what happened to my questions? Just give me, I'm sorry, bear with me. Now that I don't have my dual monitors.
No problem.
Okay, actually, hold on. Cal or others, were there any other questions, just big picture, about the housing units or development capacity or the legal process? Does anyone else have any questions about that? I think yes,
most
Rosanna?
of my questions are around that area.
Okay.
So.
Okay, Karen, are you ready?
I'm ready. Okay, so.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you explain the difference between the RHNA or RHNA number that's required? Are those strictly affordable units, low, moderate, affordable units, or is those all residential units? Can you separate out what's meant by that?
Yes, it's as policy and regulation go, it can be a little bit confusing. And that's a question that a lot of planners have as well. So there's a number of approximately 2,600 housing units that are for this 8-year period for Thousand Oaks, and they are divided by income level. And there was a slide about that, and I believe that's in the briefing book as well. I can pull that up if that's helpful.
That's okay.
But so there are from very low, moderate, and above moderate are the income categories. The idea is that that the state wants to encourage housing at different income levels. However, it is difficult to require housing, and so what the state does is they use density as a proxy for whether you are going to be able to achieve housing. So at the very affordable housing. So at the very low and at the low densities, the parcels that are housing element parcels and that are going to be identified later in the process. We haven't done that yet, but that are going to be identified later in the process are going to have to accommodate at least 30 units per acre.
Okay, so in summary, the low to moderate affordable units, the requirement is 2,600 over an 8-year period.
It's 2,600 total units, and of those, and I can't remember the number. Maybe Michael, you have that number in your head.
I've got it.
Ian has that number. Yep. About half of those are very low or low, and those are the ones that have to be 30 units an acre.
Okay. So some of those 2,600 are not going to fall within the quote affordable category at all.
Correct.
That they don't have to. That's correct.
Okay. So now let me move to my next question that is moving into that area. Based on the 3 alternatives that have been put forward, what is the range of the total number of housing units for alternative 1, 2, and 3 that would be provided based on what's out there?
The total number of housing units overall?
Yeah, like alternative 1 would create how many housing units? Alternative 2, if it's adopted as currently presented, which I know it's not going to be, but what are we talking about? What do these plans look like if somebody just pulled the trigger tomorrow and said, we're going to go with this? How many housing units would this create?
So now, and I'm glad you said if we go with one of those, because the important thing is these are concepts in order to encourage discussion. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's a really important point. They all actually will have the same. They generally have allow for the same number of housing units. And so that was one of the that was one of the basic principles, was that that Measure E says you can't go above the number of 81,124, and SB 330, Senate Bill 330, which is a state law, says you can't reduce the number, you can't reduce capacity in the city. So what we tried to do was get as close as we could in the alternatives process to 81,124. So to be honest, you know, some are a little above, some are a little below, but at this point it doesn't matter, because ultimately the what comes forward is going to be that number. So they really are all within the same range, and so we want you to look at
what we have in the city now. How many more additional units would this create?
So okay, so there's two things. So one is there is what's called build out capacity, which is the number that we're talking about. And build out is very different than a growth projection. So the RENA, which we talked about earlier, focuses more on a projection of how much housing the city should plan for in the next 8 years. And so build out is a theoretical maximum if you take every parcel and build it to its maximum capacity. Now, a lot of times, most of the times, parcels are not built to their maximum capacity for a variety of reasons. You know, you physically can't do it when you have to build parking. There's constraints on the property. So there's lots of reasons why. So what that number is, it's a theoretical maximum that will never, you know, will really never be achieved in a city that's already mostly built out. Right now, there's about 48,000 housing units in the city, and so the capacity, the theoretical capacity is 33,000 housing units, and I don't think anyone believes the city is going to add 33,000 housing units at any point in the future. And so, you know, this isn't about, you know, trying to get 33,000 housing units. It's about both accommodating the RENA, making sure we're abiding by state regulations, which is the SB 330, and also thinking about what are the ways that the community can evolve, because all communities evolve in a variety of ways. What are the ways that the community can evolve such that it meets other goals of the community? We did hear a lot about the need for affordable housing, for a diversity of housing types, from that there are young folks who want to move back to the city. There are teachers, professors, firemen, policemen who can't move into the city because of the cost of housing. And so there's a lot of reasons to think about adding a diversity of housing in the city. Now, again, you know, I don't think anyone believes that it would ever get to 33,000 housing units additional.
But
and it's certainly, and
these alternatives at maximum, not including other parcels of land that are in the no change category. So in this 8% that it has potential for change, that could result in 33,000 additional units. That's what I'm trying to nail down.
No, it's across all of the city itself. So including in the what we're calling the areas of stability, those areas of stability still have capacity as well.
Okay, so just in these three alternatives or the areas of change, what is the amount of additional housing? That's what I'm trying to find out.
I don't have that exact number, but they're all the same, all of the alternatives.
Is that something you can get back to us on?
Yeah, potentially we can get that number. We can get that number out. But again, I think this is about the vision and not. I mean, what we're trying to do is think beyond the numbers and get to the vision of what you want to see, rather than the numbers.
Well, I think the numbers are important because with the community as a whole, we do see a vision and we see the need for affordable housing. We don't want a general, I'm speaking for myself, but a lot of people that I'm involved with do not want a general plan that is overkill. So if we really only need an additional 15,000 let's say affordable housing or multifamily housing units, we do not want a general plan that's going to possibly have 30,000. So I think it is an important issue, and it is something that we need to we need to know and be very aware of. So we don't need
Okay.
overbuilder to overbuild it. So that's the reason.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate you saying, you clarified that the we was you and the people you talked to and not everybody, because
Right.
at 130,000 people in the city. So thank you for doing that. Okay, so we've had a few new folks join, so I think we can maybe pause a second and have the new folks introduce themselves. Tony, I'm going to start with you. You're the first one I see. So just say who you are and whether you attended the February 2nd meeting and if you reviewed the briefing book.
So my name is Tony Gidd. I live in Westlake Hills. I did not attend the first meeting. One of the things I'd like to hear about is the maximum height and density for some of the proposed developments, like on the Christmas tree lot on Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And I'd like to understand what the number of affordable units will be and how that will be maximized rather than just high rent units in some of these apartments and condos that have been mentioned.
Okay, great. Let's hold on to those questions and we can certainly come back to them. Okay, so let's see who else has joined. Darren?
Hello, my name is Darren Gilbert. I live in Sunset Hills, and this is my first time to this meeting, and I'm just a newcomer to this.
Great. Well, welcome. We're glad you joined us. Feel free to ask any questions you have, and if you're new, we've been doing this for a year and a half, so feel free to ask questions about the history and how we got here as well.
Okay.
Let's see. Paul, are you on at this point? Can you hear us? I see you're connecting to audio. Okay, so maybe not yet. Is there anyone else who has joined who didn't introduce themselves? And actually, Paul, are you with us now? Okay, we will come back to Paul. Okay, so let's see. Rosanna, you had a question.
Yes, so in the process of doing the general plan, there have been two building developments that have been voted on by City Council. The one by Caruso and then the other one over by the old Christmas tree lot. How does that impact the number that you're proposing, or is that in addition, or how does that play into the general plan?
Those would be incorporated in. So anything that's already built or approved. When again we're looking at a build out number overall, and we have to maintain that same number of units. And so if it goes one place, it doesn't go somewhere else. And so this is very common. A general plan takes 2 to 3 years, and it's very common for both development projects to happen as well as other projects that relate to the general plan. And we essentially roll with it, and ultimately it just gets incorporated in.
So what do you mean by it gets incorporated in? Does that mean that whatever plan, if it's, let's say it's plan number 1, does that mean that it's going to reduce the number of units within that plan, or what, if you can specify what that means? Because isn't there just a certain number overall that can be built out over the next 8 years?
No, the number is for RENA. So are you asking specifically about if in terms of if it gets built, does that have an impact on the 2,600 housing units?
Yes.
Or okay, you're talking about the 2,600. Yeah. I'm not a housing element expert, and there are I believe that if a project gets approved now, it would count towards that number. But Ian, do you know specifically? I know you do a lot of housing work.
Yeah, actually the cutoff is more around June of this year. So basically if it's approved and issued up to that point, it would count as part of this RENA cycle. But then, yeah, pending projects that are still in process would count towards, after June, they would still count towards that RENA.
Yeah, and to be clear, these were, what's the term, that they weren't, these are not approved projects. These are approved to continue on in the process.
Absolutely, yeah, I do know that. But but I wanted to kind of get a sense of how future projects are going to affect the general plan. And then just kind of like a side note, I've been talking before city council twice, and I've come to these meetings a couple of times, and I wanted to kind of get an understanding of how you do outreach to get more voices from people from the senior community, from the disabled community, from Spanish speaking communities here in the area, so that we can get more voices of people and have a much more inclusive dialogue about what is going to be transpiring in our city. So I don't know, I know that you do the Acorn, but is there anything else that you guys are actively doing to to promote more inclusivity in how the plan is being, to get more input from everyone in the community, not just the select.
Yeah, Kristen, do you want to talk a little bit about, because about some of the engagement we've been doing, and just again starting, a year and a half ago with email blasts and announcements at council meetings and mailings, and so so Kristen, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Starting with the process I'll just start with pre-COVID really quickly. We tried to meet everybody in the community where they were. We did as many pop-up events as we possibly could, whether it be at any of the fairs, showing up at the farmers markets, going to any big event that was in the city so that we could just catch people where they were. We've done periodic email blasts. We've reached out to many different organizations within the city. And even after COVID, we've still just been trying to build on those relationships. We've met with different high school groups. We have met with the teen leagues on multiple occasions. We've met with the Youth Commission multiple occasions and continue to go to their meetings and give them updates throughout the process. We've held a youth summit for them. We had a senior summit planned right before COVID started, so unfortunately we weren't able to do that, but we're still keeping in contact with our senior groups. We have been reaching out to the homebound communities. We have reached out to some of the youth groups for the, there's a great Spanish leadership class that we've reached out to. So we've just been trying to continue building our relationships, and anytime that somebody sends us a tidbit or you should reach out to this person, you should reach out to that organization, we would gladly reach out and continue to do that. So if anybody has any more ideas, send them our way. Tony, I see your hand raising.
So I'm on the commission for the, on the council for the Thousand Oaks Council on Aging. So I would welcome someone to come out and talk to us so that we can get more engagement from the senior community.
Please send an email to gp@toaks.org. I do answer those emails, and I would love for you to reach out to this person and give me a contact, and we will do that.
Okay, great. I will do that.
So thank you.
Follow up on Rosanna's question, please.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, I want to hold on one second here. I know that there are some people who have really specific questions about how to use the Conveyo tool. Mary, you were one of them. Are there others? Because I want to actually, Melissa can actually, we can do a little breakout room and we can put you in a room and Melissa can walk you through how to do that and you can ask questions. So who else wants to do that? And Mary, do you want to do that now or do you want to hear this conversation? You're on mute, I'm sorry.
Oh, Mary, you're muted. Yeah.
Mary left.
So I'd really like to follow up. I'd really like to follow up on Rosanna's question if I can.
We'll get to it. Tony, we'll get to it in 1 second.
We don't have much time left this evening, so I'd like to do it another night, Melissa, if that's possible.
Okay. Can I suggest we're getting a little off topic on the specific issue of this general plan? We only have 20 minutes left. I wonder if we could stay focused on specific issues.
We actually go until 8, and so so is there anyone else who wants to have a little sidebar on how to use the online tool? Could you raise your hand or say something? Okay, so we can pause on that for now. We don't have to do a breakout room.
Is Karen
Thank
raising
you
her
for-
hand because of, is Karen? Or
No,
is that
I'm sorry, I don't need the breakout room. I'm just moving on to
Okay.
the next question.
Got it.
Okay, so
I had one.
I'd like us to really quickly close the engagement loop, because I want to make sure we're here to answer questions about the alternatives themselves. And as Kristen said, if you have suggestions about engagement, then I think you can send an email and we'll follow up. Okay, Tony.
So Rosanna was talking about the senior aspects of the general plan. And as I followed it, I couldn't find a section in the general plan that addressed seniors. And yet seniors are the fastest and growing segment of the population in the city. And they are going to need the most help as the city continues to age here. And yet the general plan is really general, and it doesn't have a specific segment that I can find that addresses the needs of seniors as you go through this and look at how you're going to build and whether all of the apartments and units will be senior friendly or age friendly. There are a lot of concerns that I really like to see addressed.
I think that's a great comment. What we produced is a briefing book on the land use alternatives, and it's not the general plan. So the general plan hasn't been written yet, and it will. I know there's been a lot of conversation about aging in place and the need to do that and the services associated with that. And so we've definitely heard some comments, but it's not included in the land use alternatives because that's not the focus of.
No, but the building requirements, that you're talking about are included, and the ability to have grab bars in bathrooms and wide doors and things, whether it's those kinds of things are in this section.
Those are not, so those are building code requirements, and they're not. What the general plan does is the general plan addresses these topics at a high level policy direction, but specifics like grab bars, design of units, those are all in the building code, which is not the general plan. But your point is a really good one, which is that the community is aging, and we need to make sure that the constitution of the city, the general plan, is set up so that and supports aging in place and supports not just things like grab bars, and access to units, but also access to services. So there is that as well.
So where do we find that information? Where do we find that information?
It has not been developed yet because we haven't written a general. So right now the general plan has not addressed that level of policy. We're still at the big picture, but the city does have building codes that address those topics, and those I think city staff can point you to where specifically those are. But again, it's not something at that level of detail that we address in the general plan. Okay. So why don't we move on? Are there questions about alternatives themselves that folks have? So Karen, I see your hand up.
Okay, so I know there was one area within Newbury. I've tried to look at the interactive maps for the 4 areas of change, and obviously they're busy. There's a lot of colors and stuff, and that can't be avoided. I know there's one large plot of land in Newbury Park that is currently zoned for low density residential, where the alternatives are reflecting medium density residential or mixed use. I'm wondering, can you identify on the map for us any other areas within the areas of change that would truly change currently low density residential, meaning single family homes, to mixed density or medium density? Can you show us other areas in the city where that's going to be changed? Assuming, of course, these changes.
Yeah, I am trying to think of the other areas. I know that of if there are any, and staff, maybe you can help me out. This is something maybe we have to come back to you with, because we can actually do a quick analysis.
That would be great.
To say, single, what has gone from, from low density residential, the lower density residential to something that's higher, so we can show where those changes actually are. A lot of them were parcels that were commercial. right now that you could build commercial that would then allow for some residential on them. So there's a lot of that's happening, or if they're industrial right now, that maybe they would be a higher intensity industrial or allow some residential on those. So that's the majority of them.
Guess, but I
yeah,
completely identify
no,
on the map. So
no, it's a good question, and I don't have an answer. Simran, do you know?
Yeah, I was going to suggest you can on the interactive map tool, you can toggle between the existing general plan layer and the alternatives layer to see what the old designation was. And
I have tried to do that, but it's extremely cumbersome to try to zero down into actual streets, and the overlays the overlays of the existing don't match the overlays on the change area. It's just very hard to navigate that. So I'm hoping the experts would just be able to say, hey, bing, bing.
I think you pinpointed the biggest one, the biggest area that is changing. But I honestly don't remember because I haven't memorized what every parcel in the. So let us do a little research and help you understand that a little bit more.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. I see a bunch of hands up. Becca, I'm going to go to you, and then Andy, and then Cindy.
I just had a quick question. I understand SB whatever it is that the new law that says we can't downzone. Is there anything in the law that says we have to kind of mine those units like we did, like the city did before when we were looking at measuring and analyzing it for how many? Is there anything that compels us to actually go back and rezone those already developed neighborhoods to mine the extra unit?
I don't think there's anything in the law that says that. However, as we discussed at the meeting, there are a lot of areas where just because of the legal requirements, you could have an area that has 8,000, 10,000 square foot lots on it, and then you could build 15 units an acre on those lots. So, and that the state law changes in state law would allow you to do that.
But there's nothing if we wanted, and not saying that we do or don't, but if we wanted to, we could leave those as is.
Sure. And there were, we asked that question at the meeting, and there were a number of folks who said, you know what, let's allow multifamily housing within those single family areas. So we did see that there were comments about that, and it's certainly not off the table if it's a policy direction to leave some of those units in those areas and not transfer as many. Again, that's a decision that can be made. We did follow and we did take that path because we had heard what we thought was more of a previously a real direction that if it's single family, let's try and keep it single family. So that was what we responded to.
All right, thanks. I didn't know if it was allowed to do that. I couldn't remember.
It's a great question. It's a great question, and we understand that all these state laws are really complicated, and even we as planners who deal this are constantly catching up with some of these changes and the implications of what they mean. So I know it's difficult for all of you as well. Andy, you're next.
Oh yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. So thank you for taking my question. So given the increase of the planned unit, and I think we all anticipated population will grow. And I think the need of a worship and a public gathering place also, there will be growth. But reviewing the strategy in the briefing book, I didn't find anywhere to emphasize like church and worship place planning. So I'm wondering, is that something being addressed or just left out?
So according to law, churches are allowed, I believe, in any district, in any area, in any zone. So we don't identify areas and we say this is a place of worship. Just like we don't identify an area and say, this is a park unless it's already a park. So if something's already a church, I believe we've left them as institutional, designated as institutional uses, but we don't identify future places to say this is an area for an institutional use. That is because state law allows any parcel to be converted to a church.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. It's a good question. Cindy, you were next. And then
you.
Cal, I saw your hand up after that.
Thank you. So I just have a couple of questions. For Measure E dollars, is there a way to mandate universal design on developments that use Measure E dollars?
So Measure E does not have money associated with it. So there isn't money associated with Measure E. It's merely a ballot initiative that was passed, a long time ago.
So thank you for helping me understand that. So when we talk about the Measure E, where would we be able to, or if would that be in the sort of the general plan policies to mandate developments to be designed with universal design practices and ideals?
That would be more of, so I guess there's a couple of things. So one is that would be more of a policy in the general plan itself that we would, that's really where that would come up. The city does have funding for affordable housing where there's discretionary funding to be able to apply it to projects. It's not a lot of money, but anywhere where the city has control over the purse strings, so to speak, it has more control over what can happen in those areas. But really, I think it's a conversation about equity and design overall, to make sure that the design of the community is equitable for everyone, people who are living here now and people who may want to live in the community in the future, that there's a space for them. And that goes, not only for universal design, but I think it also goes for affordability, for types of units, for lots of things.
Right. Thank you for mentioning equity. I was wondering, I just have two more questions.
Yeah. With
the land use map, is there an equity impact or index that is offered or available with each version?
Not specifically. And I'm not sure what that would actually look like. If you have suggestions about metrics, maybe we can talk offline. I'd be really interested if you have an idea about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess off the top of my head, I look for environmental equity, obviously, transportation equity with the land use maps, mobility, inclusivity. So that would be interesting. I know in the past we talked about models that might be available in terms of accessibility and representation for disabled and aging population. And then the third question, I want to be fair about the time. So this should be an easy one. When can we expect a Spanish version of the land use draft maps? Of the draft land use maps?
You can expect it next week. They're being translated right now.
Great, thank you. And then last question, I'll shut up. Can you help me understand, once we decide an alternative, where's the flexibility for zoning requirements within that alternative? Do we have to consider that now as we're evaluating an alternative, or is there some flexibility once we say this is the large, I imagine this is the thing that we're trying to do, right? So once we pick an alternative, is there opportunity to discuss zoning for commercial, for affordable housing, for whatever?
Yeah, well, so a couple of things. So that's a great question.
The equity point of view, zoning can really open up a lot of equitable aspects to it.
Yeah, so partially, let me just step back, because that's a great question. It's also it could be a very long answer, because it gets into some pretty complicated topics. So I'm going to try and answer this briefly, so we can, and then we can circle back later at the end if there's more time and talk in more detail. So the process that we have now is, so we have these conceptual alternatives. We have these alternatives we're asking folks to give their preferences, not only overall, obviously, but individually about individual areas. And of course, if there's anything that you feel like we're missing in an area or an overall concept, we want to hear that. Because what we're going to do is actually take all of those comments and then we're going to hone it in and try and do a preferred direction, which is going to go to council in April. So Planning Commission in March and then council in April. And what we're trying to do is get a somewhat stable land use map that is for the general plan. Now, there's probably going to be the opportunity to do tweaks to that land use map in the time following that, the months following that, as we have more community conversation. But we need that stable map in April so we can continue to move forward with the housing element, because we have a housing element deadline. So it needs to be stable enough so that we can move forward with the housing element. After the general plan is adopted is the time that zoning happens. So zoning doesn't happen now, and so there's a lot of the dimensional requirements of setbacks and open space requirements and parking requirements that are going to happen afterwards, after the general plan is adopted. Now, that said, from a density and a broad land use perspective, the general plan rules. So zoning needs to be within that general plan, but it has to also be pretty equal to that general plan number. But there is the opportunity, as long as the density and uses are generally the same, particularly the density and height, then you can do tweaks within zoning after that to achieve some of these things that you want to achieve. So it's not like right now we have to give that answer in the next month or month and a half. There's going to be time to work through some of those things later on.
Thank you. It sounds like we should keep that in mind when we're evaluating the alternatives, as well as to potentially what can offer the most flexibility moving forward. Thank you for allowing me so much.
Yeah, and it's also it's a great question, because you know what this is that there's sort of these layers of regulation and layers of planning when it comes to land use, and right now we are actually at the very highest level. Which is the land use alternatives for the general plan. We're at the highest level, and yes, Cindy, we keep filtering down, and then we end up with a general plan, land use plan, and then we go to zoning, and then it can get pulled apart a little bit more and be more detailed. So I know, again, sometimes it's, when you're concerned about a specific topic, I know it can be a little bit unsatisfying to say, well, you know what, that's later down the road, but it does tie together, and we need to understand those connections and not forget about them, but also not try and do too much now.
Thanks.
Okay, boy, I see. Cal, you had your hand up next,
yeah,
and then I'm going to go to Karen and then Catherine.
I'll try to be brief. First of all, just from a process standpoint, I submitted a couple of questions or issues on email before the meeting. I assume we're not going to address those during this meeting. So is there going to be some feedback, some response to those issues after?
I got your emails today, and I think you sent one at 5:57 p.m.
Yeah,
so I haven't had a chance to get back to that one.
Well, no, I didn't expect.
Why don't you expected
a response coming later?
Yeah, no, we can actually talk about some of those today, because I think other people maybe they got forwarded to me.
I did want to talk about one of them right now, because I think it's germane to what we're talking about here. Others, people like Tony have mentioned it as well in terms of some of the demographic issues. It seems to me that in order for us to make any decisions on agreeing upon any of these three alternatives in the 4 different areas, it seems to me we need to know a lot more about infrastructure needs and our ability to accommodate these changes with regard to density and traffic and housing, et cetera. Is there any part of these general plans that does something like an EIR for the overall general plan, so that we understand what additional roads are necessary, parking facilities are necessary, all those things are necessary that are beyond a development plan that an individual parcel can support? But it seems like we already have in our community some pretty congested areas as they are right now, and for us to add more density, for example, up Moore Park Road in the corridor around Jans Mall, to add more density and more commercial or industrial developments is going to require some significant improvements in roads and bike lanes and parking structures or we're going to have some serious problems. So do we address any of that before addressing the final decisions?
Well, before addressing the adoption of the general plan, yes, there will be an environmental impact report that is prepared, that is related to the preferred alternative.
There's 12 packages here. Are you going to do a separate plan for each of the packages?
No. What we're trying to do here with this process is to narrow down to get to, in the next few months, to get to, as I said, a somewhat stable preferred alternative, and then we'll do more analysis on that preferred alternative. You know, again, I need to point back to this difference between what we call build out, which is every parcel built to its maximum density, and what we expect the next 20 years of growth are going to be in the city. And those numbers are going to be vastly different in terms of what that total number would be. So what we will do is we will, right now we're at the full build out to look at the vision, but then, and we're trying to make all of those equal, but then what we're going to do is we're going to look at how much growth we think could realistically happen within the next 10 to 20 years. And then that's what the environmental impact report is going to to be on, because that's the way that the planning works.
Will there be actually a plan for expansion of our roadways, the freeway, the major arteries, bike paths, parking?
We haven't. I mean, yes, if the major infrastructure changes that are potentially needed are something that will be discussed as part of the plan itself.
I'm just wondering how you can reach any decisions on which alternatives are most favorable without looking at those elements and the financial and the environmental impacts on those.
Well, because we have to start somewhere. So we have to start, and where we're starting is the vision, and then we can design the infrastructure around the vision that the community wants. And that's typically the way it works. You don't start with the capacity, because infrastructure is constantly changing and constantly getting upgraded. We have experienced things where plans where you start down a path and you think everything's going to be fine, and then it's not, and you change course. So we have that built into the discussion in the process. It's a great question, because you can't build and just expect everything around it to stay the same.
Right.
Those things, the infrastructure to support it has to change. I think it is also important to think about the connection between physical change and development that can happen in the city and the city's tax revenues, which is an important thing. You know, at this point, the city has more space for retail. And a lot of the retail is underperforming, and we heard a lot of comments about the corridors and what can happen to those, and how can they actually be more contributing to both the community visually, as well as be a positive impact on the city. And so, that's another thing we're looking at, which is what's called the fiscal impact of the preferred direction as well, because that's an important aspect as well. Okay, so Karen, you were next. I'm going to keep going in order here.
I sort of want to build on what Cal was asking, and it's really a very big general question. So I guess there's some fear and lack of trust with Sacramento, and Sacramento putting the hammer down on us, not just our city, but other cities. And so are you saying that regardless of what our general plan looks like, if we have X density in a particular area, what guarantees or comfort can we have that the city is still going to be able to exercise control over the reasonableness of actually approving permits? Because part of Senate Bill 330 was streamlining the permit process, et cetera. How are we going to prevent developers from coming in and just putting the hammer to us saying, this is what we're zoned for in this area, this is what the general plan says? I don't care that you're being unreasonable saying that I need to increase the size of the street by 4 lanes. And so how does that really work over the next 20 years, and how much control will the city continue to have if we have a general plan where we cannot support the infrastructure?
Yeah, no, it's a reasonable question. And, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, I wouldn't have predicted that the state would be passing the regulations it has passed now. So I know that you and other members of the community and other members of other communities are upset, and jurisdictions are upset about some of the RENA numbers and some of the state regulations that have come down that have taken away some of the local control. And so, there's no argument that the state has come in and taken a little bit of control away in order to try and allow more housing to be built. The reaction to that, it was a reaction to the fact that the state has underbuilt housing by 2.4 million housing units over the last 2 decades. And it has created tremendous impact across the state. And so, this is their response. Whether it's the right response, I don't know. But what we can do with this is, I think it's important in this general plan that the city have the vision for how it wants to grow and where it wants to grow, so that it can direct the growth in a way that benefits the city. And I really want to emphasize that, because from the looks of it, the state is going to continue to try and promote housing. And I think that the thing that the city can do is to identify where that housing should go and what it should look like. And if that can happen in the general plan, and then developers should be able to stick with what is in the general plan. And then if an area says 30 units an acre and a project comes in at if a project comes in, the city can't then say, and a project comes in at 30 units an acre, the city can't say, I only want 15 units an acre here. So the city has to allow up to the maximum density. So, and the city also has to be reasonable about the things that it is asking for projects to do, right? So you can't, if a project's coming in on Thousand Oaks Boulevard, the city couldn't say, because of this project, we want the entire corridor of Thousand Oaks widened. That's an unreasonable request. It can run analysis, and if it finds that it's causing impacts, it can ask for those direct impacts to be modified. But this is the reason that we do this at a 20-year build out. And this goes to Cal's point, which is a great point, which is the city needs to be able to plan for where that growth is going to go, and then be able to accommodate that growth in a thoughtful way through infrastructure decisions. And the best way to do that is to focus growth in certain areas, understand what, do its best to predict what's going to happen, and then plan for the building of that infrastructure around the potential change that's happening in the city. So that's the best way around it. And that way you understand as a community what is going to be, what could be built and where it's going to be, and that the conversations are happening at this general plan level rather than at the project by project level, which, as we know, takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. So we're trying to avoid some of those conversations that have occurred, and it also gives the city a lot more power, I think, to say, developer, you need to do what we say our plan says, because we just went through this process.
Matt, can I just make a comment? I'm just thinking about what you're saying there. And of course, I think what I've heard is that the general plan will give a ceiling on density that will allow for the potential for that density to be achieved, but not necessarily will. But it seems to me, if we really want to have local control, we should try to minimize that density. We could always go larger. We could always say, hey, it's only the general plan says we have a plan that allows for only 15 housing units per acre, and we find a project that is very suitable for 25, we can always expand it, right? After the fact, city has the power to do that. Sure,
you absolutely can. However, at some point, especially in certain areas, and the areas that we've identified for the most part where there is the potential for multifamily housing or mixed-use housing, if you have the densities too low, nothing's going to happen.
The reason why I mentioned that is, the point I was really going to make is, why wouldn't we try to set up a general plan that tries to distribute these numbers as well as possible, keep the density numbers down so that we don't leave ourselves wide open to the potential for expanding into those areas, and spread this, this requirement over a much bigger area than the 4 small, parcel areas that we've identified as the hubs of the commercial development. We have what, 92% of the city.
I wanted to just address that
area?
comment.
Yeah,
Cal, that's interesting perspective that you have. We actually spoke with a lot of community members over the last year and a half. And one thing that we heard over and over again was that they did not want widespread change across the city. And so that's the approach that we took when we started thinking about development about land use alternatives, was how to minimize change to the city as a whole. And so the alternatives that we've prepared really focus on a smaller area of the community to kind of preserve the existing character of single family neighborhoods that most residents love in the city. And that's what we kept hearing over and over again. So that was the approach that we took thus far.
That concept makes a lot of sense. So you look at the actual numbers where you can get up to a 6-story, 60 unit per acre density, which is completely out of character of our community. I mean, you're talking about significant.
And so, Cal, yeah. I want to go. So Catherine had her her hand up. So, but I do want to say that no problem. I think it's good to sometimes continue a thread that we have here. I do want to say, we have absolutely heard from some people that that they want to keep the character of they want to keep the density and the height at 3 stories. We've absolutely heard that. We have also heard from a very large number of people who said explore higher density in a limited number of areas, go above that 3 stories. And so what we're trying to do is explore a variety of options here.
Right.
And so we absolutely hear you. And part of this process is actually to have this conversation to see if it makes sense for higher densities in some areas or not. And we, absolutely your point is valid, and we've heard it from a number of community members. We've also heard quite different things from other community members. And so, we've talked to thousands of people, and we're trying to balance what everyone has said and come up with, a couple of options for people to discuss. And ultimately, this goes to a recommendation from the Planning Commission and then to the City Council. And, regardless of what you or I think, it's ultimately going to be the 5 members of council who make this decision.
Understand.
Okay. Yep. But it's good. So, Catherine, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just had a really quick comment on Cindy's question earlier when she was talking about like equitable, guidelines put on the map. I remember like for the environmental justice presentation, there was like some information about like poverty and then like drawing it out. So maybe we can incorporate that in. Yeah, just a suggestion.
Yeah. You mean overlay maps of income with the maps we have here. Okay. Okay. Pablo, you were next. And
Yeah.
Simran, were you gonna?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Regardless of the alternative, and yes, you're right. One of the reasons, specifically in my case, that I moved into this community, beautiful community, is the character and the way the city is. I think we'll be ashamed to lose that identity of what Thousand Oaks is. I mean, the residential feeling that you have here is something that I think everybody loves. As far as the density, with all these alternatives, are there any schools being planned to accommodate all the new residents, or are these the potential new units, are they going to be allocated to this existing school system that we have right now in place?
That is something that ultimately, going back to Cal's insightful comment about infrastructure, is something that we look at the same. When we get to a growth number, we'll talk to the schools. I know that the schools, at least previously, have had declining populations, declining enrollment, and that's because, as Cal, I'm bringing you up a bunch of times. You made a bunch of great comments, which is that the community is aging, and so as the community ages, there's fewer school-age kids, which means the population has gone down. So when we get those numbers for the growth projections, again, not the build out, but the growth projections for the next 20 years, we're going to work with the school districts to look at what that means from an infrastructure perspective. Ultimately, it's the school district's responsibility to figure out how many schools they need, but there are fees associated with the development projects as they come forward to make sure that there's capacity. But again, you know, a really good point. Okay, I had Daniel next, and then Karen, and then Roseanne.
Hi, thanks for putting this on. I guess my first question would be about the feasibility of enhancing density with possible subterranean building. Is that just not friendly to the current building codes? I know,
Daniel, you're cutting in and out. Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, could any of these density improvements be brought about by building underground? Perhaps if we had more liberal underground building codes, has that been explored? I know Elon Musk is talking about maybe a 101 corridor for his boring company that would go north from LAX along the 101. And it seems like that could be a real boon for our area if it made it all the way up to 1,000 Oaks.
So what can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by going underground? I mean, subterranean, like infrastructure or housing or stores?
You know,
what are you thinking?
I know Seattle has a mall that's, you know, pretty much underground when I was up there. And I know San Francisco City, for example, has a green roof initiative where every roof either has to have plants or solar collectors on it. And, you know, it seems like if we built underground, we could actually leave the space above as open habitat even, you know, eventually. So I guess, you know, it's a question of how permissive the building codes would be for that. You know, could be done with cut and cover type of construction. I just don't know if that's been incorporated as an option or a possible alternative.
Well, Simran, were you going to say something?
Sure. Yeah, I was, but go ahead.
No, go ahead. They're probably tired of listening to me.
Daniel, that's a really interesting idea, and there are certain uses which can be built underground. So shopping malls can be underground, infrastructure, parking, of course, can be underground, but areas or spaces where people actually live, the building codes generally don't allow those to be underground for multiple reasons, including safe egress in case of, you know, earthquake. We live in earthquake country, so being able to get out safely, light, ventilation, etc. But in terms of other non-residential uses, those are certainly options that are available. And the general plan wouldn't either require or prohibit that. That's something that would be considered if the building designer and the property developer want to explore that. It's also very expensive.
Yeah, I know.
And yeah,
could I ask a follow-up?
Areas, one last thing, the water table in Thousand Oaks is fairly high in many areas, so building underground is complicated by that.
Okay. I had sort of a related question. Is it possible I know the city of Thousand Oaks is a municipal corporation, and would it be possible to actually have the corporation owned by the residents or other stakeholders? They could all be kind of shareholders in the corporation and actually get dividends back if it was run with more comprehensive management, perhaps? Are there any cities that use a model like that? I have no
answer for that question.
It's kind of an out of the box question too. Okay.
Yeah, haven't heard of that. So I can't. I don't know, and I don't know if it's necessarily a general plan type of question. It's certainly not a land use alternatives concept. But your idea of going back to something you said earlier about requiring green roofs or solar or incentivizing them are definitely things a lot of communities have done.
And then, can I get one more question?
Yeah, and actually,
okay. If that's
solar roofs are required. Solar roofs are required on all residential construction moving forward by the state, so that's already required.
Yeah. Daniel, let's come back to you. A few people have had their hands up, so I want to circle back.
All right.
Karen, do you have another question? Karen Maloney, sorry.
Oh,
sorry.
You know,
Sorry, Karen, there's multiple Karens.
Yeah, this is Karen Maloney speaking. Well, for Kristen, I just wanted to mention that our Property Owners Association would probably really appreciate you reaching out to them. The president.
Send me it. I've actually sent emails to all the HOAs in the city, but I'm hoping for some response. Which one is it?
Westlake Hills Property Owners Association, and the president is Linda Spencer.
Oh, I'm sorry, you broke up. Linda, what was her last name?
Linda Spencer.
Spencer, got it.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel as though, I know you've been working hard on this for the last year and a half, but when I talk to my friends, they don't really know anything about it. And even when I kind of go on Nextdoor and say, hey, this is what they're doing for our neighborhood, which is Westlake Hills, behind Ralph's Plaza, across, kitty corner from the promenade. They really don't, they don't really understand the impact that it could possibly have on our homes. Now, maybe in 20 years we won't live here anymore, but it's a very walkable community now. So I guess I'm not addressing you anymore, Kristen. I'm just saying that when I get off the 101 at Westlake Boulevard, it just feels good to be here because I've got the promenade and all the buildings are pretty much set back. It's just a beautiful place. And when I look at the alternatives for this section that you're offering, one of them's okay, but the other two are really congested and they're showing like 4 or 5 story high-rise apartment buildings. And I just feel like I hate to be so cruel to your work, but it looks really ugly. I feel like it's Balboa. I feel like I'm jumping off the 101 onto Balboa or something. And I feel like are you taking into account the aesthetics of what the city's gonna look like with some of these alternatives? It just makes me sad. And I guess
thanks,
that's
Karen. Thanks for your comment. No, we appreciate it. So, as I said, we have given a lot of thought to this, and we have spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people, and the community is decidedly very mixed on taller buildings. So there are certainly a large number of people who have said, don't build anything at all. We want to keep it exactly as it is. And then there are folks who have said, you know what, we need to have some change. We need to have buildings that are a little bit taller, and we want to have those in a limited number of areas. So, Karen, we've heard both things, and it's certainly not our intent to ruin the community. It is a beautiful community, and I don't know if you were on for this, but Melissa Stark, who was on our staff, grew up in the city, so she's working on the plan. So she really understands the character and always provides input to us, and staff does. And so we're not trying to ruin. We did think about intensity. We showed buildings, but when you think about the promenade, for example, and if that could accommodate higher density buildings, it's not, and it's hard to show in photos, but it's not that there would be that scale of building across every inch of the site. The idea is that it would allow up to that height, but it would be measured across the site, and it would be well designed with lots of open space and community gathering spaces. So, I know we just showed a building, and it's hard to show the future character of an area with just one building. So I appreciate the comment there, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, the other thing, Matt, that I noticed, and I don't know who decided where you were putting these apartment buildings and mixed use area. I don't know who decided these 4 areas, but it seems like my neighborhood, Westlake Hills, this is going to be a huge impact It's a very walkable neighborhood now. A lot of older people live here. A lot of people who don't drive anymore walk. They can walk everywhere from this neighborhood. And, you know, in the future, older people won't, it doesn't look like with the plans that you're presenting, that will be the case going into the future for older people who live in this neighborhood. And they will be different people we're talking about. And so I wondered, Matt, you know, I noticed North Ranch doesn't have any developments going up there. They have a nice community center, community building there. I mean, what made them decide not to put a 4-story apartment building there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the process that we went through with this was we identified, we asked the GPAC, and then we did an online survey where we asked people to identify where different types of development could go in the city. And people put pins on the map, and we can show you, some of those are in the briefing book. We went on and we did interactive activities at a couple of sessions with the General Plan Advisory Committee that the public participated in with that. And even though it was a General Plan Advisory Committee meeting, we had the public do the same activities that the GPAC was doing. And there was actually quite a bit of consensus about where those, the employment uses, the mixed use, the multifamily, the townhomes, about where those should go in the city. And so we use that as the basis for making that decision. Now, we do have areas that we identified as village centers, which are a little bit more spread throughout the city. But you know, if you have suggestions, if you think that we missed some areas, then, you know, please tell us, because you know, if you think there's opportunities to build or to change the regulations in any place, then, you know, certainly let us know with that. But that was the process of doing it. So it was through that community process that hundreds of people participated in. And then the other thing, just and I see Rosanna, then Karen Wilburn, then Cal. But you know, there's a lot of work that's been done about what an age-friendly community looks like, and you know, age-friendly communities tend to be have more vertical development, more mixed-use development to bring uses closer together, so that it's more walkable, and that lower scale development tends to lead, as people age, to social isolation. It's not always the case. But the AARP has a whole aging in place initiative, and they look at land use, and this is based on work that they have done as well. So I'm not saying it's not walkable now, and I'm not saying it's not a modification to the character, but again, some of it is based on the research that we've done there. Okay, so I'm going to go. I think I said, did I say Rosanna next? Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, Rosanna, and then Karen, and then Cal. Usually I go left to right, but here I went right to left on my screen. So so Rosanna, go ahead.
So on the original map that you showed on February 2nd, there was some alternative along Herbs and Arbalest, and because I live around that area, and I know there's a shopping center there, and it's you know, so is that off of the as a possible alternative as far as possibly developing it, and it's just the 3 that you have in place?
That's one of our village centers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had, and I don't remember what that specific village center was, but one of them was maintain it just as commercial. One was convert it to mixed use.
Right.
And then there was a third alternative, and I believe that one was a hybrid of the two, where some of it was mixed use and some of it was commercial.
Yes. So I'm just wondering,
that one in particular.
Yeah, I'm wondering because there's sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that we have 2 alternatives where that village center is maintained at mixed use low, and one where it's maintained at the existing commercial neighborhood scale.
So
that's what we've proposed so far.
Okay, so because that's not as one of the 3 proposed, so is that in addition to the 3 that are proposed?
No, Those are the three.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So there's we only showed two options for that one.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, but again, if you have suggestions about something else, let us know.
Because I think that would be really ideal because it's in a stable community and there's.
Ideal.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask what your idea was for that village center.
Yeah, no, I think that there's so much land available there. And I think that would be, gosh, that would be so ideal because it's in a stable community. There's everything would be walkable. There's a number of parks and schools available. So I can see that would be a really and it's close to the freeway. So it would be a really wonderful alternative to make use of that space. Because it's just kind of dead space there and it's all retail.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
My parents live up the street. That's like right where I grew up. We walked there. That was the only place we could walk to growing up, walking down there to get Starbucks or going to the old Blockbuster. That's like what we did growing up.
And then with that new trail that they opened up down the block on Arbor Satwa is perfect. And there's just so much richness in this community. And that retail space really does need more, I don't know, something more to it. And I can see that would be wonderful. So I definitely think that would be a great use to put something, more affordable. I know that there's a lot of apartments down the street from there, but I think that would be really, really good. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Thanks.
Okay, Karen, you're next.
Matt, can you give me like the 5-minute tour on when how multifamily housing is built? How does a unit get designated as affordable? How does it determine how many are going to be, quote, affordable? And then who bears the costs for the below market charges? And in the end, what are the guarantees that it will remain an affordable unit? For instance, I used to live in a complex in Thousand Oaks via Cleanus, which I always understood was originally formed as affordable units. Therefore, the condo units were required to be owner occupied. They couldn't be rented for more than a year, all to keep people away from turning them into being, just investment properties. Well, those units now are selling for $650,000, 30 years later. So how does the whole affordable housing program work? And what the other comment is, someone who was very involved when Dos Vientos was built explained to me that several of the apartment and condos up in the Dos Vientos area were originally presented as being there would be affordable units, and then the builder came in and said, "Oh, we can't do it," and they just kind of bypassed it all. So how does this? Yeah,
we've seen that as well, and it's for someone who believes in affordable housing, it's frustrating when that happens. So so let me this will be less than 5 minutes. This is actually pretty quick. Okay, so we want to differentiate between what we call capital A affordable and housing that is affordable. Okay, so I'm going to start with the second one, which is housing that is affordable is lower cost housing, that it just doesn't cost a lot to live there, right? So a studio apartment tends to be less expensive than a 3-bedroom home, right? So that, they're different housing units, but one is more affordable to live in than the other. There is no restriction. There's no legal restriction, no deed restriction on affordability. Okay, when people say an affordable unit, what that typically means is a unit that has a deed on it that says you cannot charge more than a certain amount for that space. Now, that's where it gets into the housing element of very low income, moderate at the percentage of AMI, which is called area median income. And so those units, you can only rent them, and it is mostly rental and not ownership. There is some ownership, but I'm going to stick with rental for now. Those units, you can only rent them to people who have a certain income. and those people have to prove that income. A lot of jurisdictions have an inclusionary housing ordinance, which says that a certain percentage of the housing units in any project built must be affordable at a different income level, at a specific income level. And the city of Thousand Oaks, I believe, has an inclusionary housing ordinance on the books, but it can certainly be strengthened to be a higher percentage of affordable units, and that is something that can be included in the general plan. And the costs of that are borne by the developer.
Okay.
So you know, and so that's sort of it in a nutshell. Then you have affordable housing developers who come in and just build affordable housing, which requires multiple sources of funding from outside, from the federal government, the state government, from local government, from private entities, just in order to make that work, because housing is so expensive.
Well, I
A
understand
lot of times
that
to
the
get to a subsidy is like $300,000 per unit
I'm sorry,
just to build that.
last comment. The city gives the subsidy?
It is, the subsidies come from a variety of sources. So cities a lot of times have affordable housing funds that people pay into. There's state programs, there's federal programs. So, you know, a typical affordable housing project will sometimes have 10 to 20 different sources of funding in order to make that project work. They're much harder to build, which is why we don't see a lot of them.
But then if for one that's not just affordable housing, if the costs are they're borne by the developer, that's kind of an initial cost. What happens 5 years down the road when?
Oh, sorry, thank you. Those are deed restricted typically for 55 years.
Okay. So the guy that buys, they know what they're buying basically. Okay.
Well, it's the developer builds it, and then you know, a management company will manage that unit and ensure that it is only rented to people who are at a certain income level.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, that was Affordable Housing 101.
That was great summary. Thank you.
Okay, it's confusing because people mean different things when they say affordable housing. We're about 20 minutes from our end time here. Kyle, it looks like you have a future Thousand Oaks planner maybe in your midst there. Does anyone else have any questions or any comments that you all want to ask? Some of you have been quiet here this evening and haven't said anything. I will not call you out, but feel free. Andrew, I did see that you had your hand up for a minute, and then you took it down. I'm gonna call on you.
Okay,
Andrew,
call.
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, go ahead and call on me. No, I wanted to just looking at the land use maps and the alternatives. Just jump in on a couple areas. Looking at mixed use and the possibility of high density mixed use, specifically at the you know. I think looking at the Oaks Mall and having the ability to put mixed use there, I've been a big component of for a number of years. Mainly because when I was on the planning commission for the city, listening to the public, what their thoughts were on when we had these mixed use projects come before us, it was obviously setbacks, traffic, parking, many of these issues, which I feel like the Oaks Mall specifically is very ripe for. And when you look at that kind of section between the Ventura County Credit Union as you come out on Moore Park and moving back towards the mall, there's a lot of good opportunity there. And I think there's a application before the city for a gym and some other uses, but I just want to generally just voice my support for having mixed use there. I think out of any location in the city for the potential of high density mixed use, that would be a spot where I'd be generally for. And then really the other location I just wanted to bring up is I actually used to live in the Via Colinas condos area myself. My wife and I, that was where we had our first home. So I spent a lot of time at kind of the Westlake Village, Thousand Oaks intersection there. And I just think I want to just caution the idea of putting a lot of development there, that's one of the, if I recall from traffic studies, that's one of the highest traffic areas in the city. And I apologize if this has been brought up before to you, Matt, but I just really worry without considering other transportation options and modes of transportation, be it, making sure those bike lanes are solidified, looking at electric scooters or other ways that people can go around. I just really wonder, putting additional development there, whether we're going to see just there's just so much traffic that goes through there because people are going up Westlake to go to, North Ranch and cut over across the city. That's just a concern I had, especially when we're looking at the alternatives and where the possibility is to see potential increased zoning or increased density there, I should say.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And actually, if you go back and look at the maps that were produced through the online survey about a year ago, there were a lot more maps. There were a lot more pinpoints at the Oaks Mall and around Jan's Marketplace than there were over in Westlake. So, the information that we've received so far bears that out. And, it may be that area, we get through the process and it just remains a commercial area without as much development. We've certainly heard some of that. And I think, a couple of other points that you brought up that I think are worth mentioning with this is that there's an advantage to focusing. If you're going to build at slightly higher densities, there's an advantage to focusing that in more limited areas so that you actually get the benefits of those uses brought together. Right. And so, Cal had mentioned, or someone had mentioned just spread it throughout the city. That tends to lead to actually more traffic congestion and more driving than if you actually concentrated in a few smaller areas. And that was really the philosophy of what we were trying to do, was to concentrate in those areas. And it can certainly potentially be done even more in the process. And certainly as we get through this, there are going to be, likely going to be areas that we're going to hear, like Westlake, that people really want it to remain commercial and not go to mixed use. And so we have that as an option, and we'll see what comes out of it. And that's why we presented it that way, because we wanted to present a range, and we'll see what comes out of it, what the feedback is.
And I think you did, absolutely fantastic job. I can vouch for you on 2 different cities now. But Simran knows my joke. But I just wanted to, on the Westlake front, I could see a mixed use, but certainly not a high or even a medium density. I think adding more residential over there, I think could work, because you do see a lot of vacancies in some of the residential shopping center areas. So I think it could increase and bring some additional business there. But coming back to what you said on the traffic, and what I just continue to love about putting high density at the Oaks Mall or concentrating in that area, is that you have the Lynn and you have Moore Park, you have easy traffic can flow right to the 101 on both sides. And it's just really built in such a great way where we can have that type of use in our city without necessarily seeing all the negative things that kind of come with that. I call them negative, but where it can be perceived as negative outcomes of having something like that. But keep up the great work, guys. You guys do a fantastic job, and I look forward to continuing in the process.
Well, thanks for joining us. Cindy, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. Hi. I know that a lot of work has been done over the course of a year and a half or so, and I'm wondering, I feel like a little bit the elephant in the room is the impacts of COVID, and perhaps different needs and different traffic patterns, different use patterns. Is there any is there any scheduling or potentially another survey to reach out to community members to see if there is a different use or any impact of any impact on COVID? Because as an example, there's a lot more delivery. I could see with developments, inside the grocery centers or commercial centers, perhaps there needs to be consideration of traffic flow. And to add on to what Mr. Pletcher was saying, some of the transportation needs might be different, infrastructure needs. So just the impact of COVID. And obviously you couldn't anticipate any of that.
Yeah, right. I mean, a year ago we were, exactly. We had the survey out about where new development should go. So, there is thinking going on about what actually, what the impact that COVID will have on the community. I mean, overall, and like how we live and how we work. And we've seen some immediate changes, which is there have been more people who have left the big areas of job centers. And I think you guys all know this. I'm in the Bay Area, and we've had a mass exodus out of San Francisco and out of Silicon Valley to other places, and people buying second homes. So places like Boise and Bellingham, Washington, and lots of places are these sort of Zoom cities, as they're called. So we may see a spreading. I think that once we actually get back in the workplace, we're going to see people are going to want to come back and come back in the workplace and come back and work together. And I do think that we have, as human nature, we have the desire to be around other people. We have the desire to interact. And in fact, what we've seen with COVID is that actually those spaces have gone outdoors, and we've actually transformed our transportation system in a lot of communities to have places to exercise and to eat outside. And I think that some of that's going to be here to stay. And I think that's actually a really cool thing that's coming out of COVID. So to more specifically answer the question, I mean, this is sort of the survey, but we are looking 20, 30 years ahead. And I think we're more likely to see impacts from new technologies that we don't know about yet than to have real changes just from COVID. And just to point back, I mean, the last land use plan was done in 1970. Seat belts weren't required in cars in 1970. I mean, things have really changed a lot. We now have cars that drive by themselves. So do you have thoughts on what it should be? Are there, what impact will it have?
I mean, I do think that people, it's human nature to gather for sure, but I do think work patterns and expectations of work, I mean, in some ways it's not popular, but the most equitable thing is that everyone was impacted, as opposed to before, a small community of disability community members had to constantly prove that they could work remotely. So I think if we want to keep our competitive advantage against our neighboring cities, which is something that I remember reading in one of the existing conditions report, I think it would be worth sort of touching base with the community to see, is this a feeling that is going to last, or is there something that we can take with this big new information that's affected everybody? And as you mentioned, in the Bay Area, you don't have to live there to work there. And I think some of our major corporations like Amgen and others who just downsized, the need for housing that is affordable, not just affordable housing, and how do we be competitive? So I think it's a really unique opportunity, once in a multi-generation, to maybe reimagine and think about some innovations that we can add for the next 25 years. Just a thought. It doesn't have to be immediate, but it could be impactful for the general plan and some policies that we can better understand and implement.
Yeah, I think some how to describe it, maybe we can do this, some sort of time for some like group think on what it means is probably a better way to think about it than maybe like an online survey. I think most people would have a hard time answering that question. I think there are a limited number of folks who are really thinking about like what it means for the physical environment and how cities operate and what it means for Thousand Oaks.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think that's a great.
Because I do think, sorry to cut you off, the sound sort of, there's
no, great.
But I do think, with small businesses being forced to close, the availability of commercial space and mixed use development might also change. So just a thought.
Yeah, well, I certainly think, and I had mentioned this before, and the data is bearing this out, that it's having a tremendous impact on small businesses, on restaurants, and there's a lot that really aren't going to recover. And as the city had more retail than it needed pre-COVID. It's really going to have a lot more after. And I think for the commercial areas, it's really going to be important in this process to think about how those areas could transform into something that isn't a vacant shopping center, or a massage parlor, or whatever is in those spaces now that maybe not contributing as much to the community as it could. So we welcome thoughts on that. Okay, some more. Any other comments or questions? You guys.
Matt.
Yeah, Pablo, and then Andrew.
Just a quick question. Going back to the herbs and los árboles, the village area there, because I do live around there. When you say low density, we have two options: low density and also keep it commercial the way it is right now. How do you go about voicing your opinion? Which option do you want? Or when will that happen? Or is there going to be some kind of a place where we need to go and give our opinions? How does that work?
Yeah, that's
Melissa,
a great
go
question.
ahead.
So if you can see the chat in the Zoom meeting right here, I just sent a link out. There's actually a survey that's open that's asking these exact questions, and you have an option to, sorry, I'm hearing a really loud echo. It asks these exact questions, and you have an opportunity to respond with your opinion about that area, as well as all the other areas that we're talking about tonight. And if you can't find that in the chat, it's also linked on the project website.
Okay, and what do you mean by low density? What does that mean?
So the options that we're considering for that particular area are mixed use low or commercial, which would be basically maintaining what's there. I'm not sure if you want to further, yeah.
So mixed use low is essentially up to a mix of uses of residential and commercial uses. It allows a mix, but it could be just one or just the other. That allows up to 30 units per acre, which is low, like three-story multifamily housing, and up to 50 feet. Which the 50 feet is essentially 15 feet higher than what's allowed in residential neighborhoods. So it's sort of a step up in height from what's in the residential neighborhoods because it is a commercial area. But again, there's, it's not necessary that the entire thing is going to be covered by a 50-foot building. More likely you would see an apartment building or some townhomes associated with the retail.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Andrew, you were next.
Thanks. So I just have away for a few minutes, so sorry if this was touched on while I was gone. But one thing that I'm interested in is in terms of the proposals, each of the land use proposing a number of mixed use types and increasing that across the portions of the city that are changed. How the jobs available in the city are affected by that, by each of those land use components, and is that studied? Is that more information available on the jobs metrics in terms of the relative to the three alternatives?
Do you mean the answer to your question is maybe, depending on what it is that you actually are looking for. And so what we did was we just looked at the total job numbers, and all of the alternatives increase the potential for the number of jobs in the city. Thank you, Simran, for sharing that. So all of the alternatives increase the potential for the number of jobs in the city. Now, some of this is just based on, again, what we call the full build out, which is you take the total area and for jobs, what happens is you multiply it and you figure out the building square footage based on the floor area ratio. And then the software that we use to do this analysis has metrics built in for different types of different types of jobs for the number of employees per 1,000 square feet. So it's essentially a ballpark, and we look at this as sort of as relative numbers. The table, I think on the previous page, Simran, if you want to go to that, has the acres for different uses. And here you can see industrial low and industrial flex, which are two of the main job producing uses. There's also the commercial designations. But you can see here that alternative 3 is really trying to focus on jobs, and identified, actually this one has more area that is industrial flex, which is kind of office park R&D, and about the same amount as industrial low. But it's just trying to expand the amount of industrial, and industrial flex is really, it's kind of, again, office and R&D space. It's trying to expand that within the city, and by doing that, actually, some of the residential numbers were higher. The residential density numbers were higher. So it was a little bit of a trade-off here. There isn't, it's sort of a guesstimate about what those jobs would actually be, because each of these designations accommodates a wide range of different types of non-residential uses.
Thank you. Usually my questions are about, mixed use and housing. And so I'm trying to tie together some of the, some of the mixed use components of ability to incorporate jobs, that we'll probably need in the city going forward. And then makes the type of housing that is considered in mixed use sort of maybe more attractive, more benefit, and bring out more community benefits. So thanks for
we did hear through the process that that a lot of the major employers, that job retention is a challenge, and that the employees want places that are more mixed use and higher density, and walkable with more activities, where there's more, that has a little bit of a different character than what's in the city now, and that what they found is that their employees are actually going elsewhere, and sometimes the jobs are actually going elsewhere because of that quality of life that the employees are looking for may not be found right now in Thousand Oaks. Now, that could be one factor that you have in thinking about the alternatives. It may not be important to you either that's an issue for the employers. So, again, the city does need to think overall about how it's paying its bills, because you all have come to know a very high quality of public services, and we in the process have been charged with trying to help make sure that happens.
All right.
Okay, Kyle.
Hey, how you doing? Are you able to hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just had a question. As a general note, I noticed on all 3 of the alternatives that there's not a lot of neighborhood high density allocated. Is there a reason that they went about doing it that way? Because when you have different rental markets and there's more owners competing against each other, you usually end up with a more competitive rental rate. So I was wondering, was that taken into account when they look at mixed use going into say the Oaks Mall versus spreading it out over 50 different places or something?
Well, I can tell you just a little bit in the thinking, and one thing is that we created the land use designations, and then we applied them to the map, and then there was a lot of sort of back and forth to make some of the numbers work. I mean, that was sort of the process of identifying differences between the alternatives, and when we got through all of this and we looked at the numbers, it actually, one of the things what you pointed out actually jumped out at me as well, which was that the neighborhood high wasn't applied a lot of places. And so I started thinking about why that was. And the reason really ended up being that we heard a lot of desire for flexibility in some of the areas that are commercial now, like the mall, and that if we put just residential or neighborhood high in there, it doesn't give the flexibility of creating a more mixed use type of place. And that the mixed use actually allows for neighborhood high on its own. So the mixed use allows for residential on its own. You don't need to build a vertical mixed use building with ground floor retail and residential above, that you can actually have a parcel that may have a single story commercial building and then a multifamily building on it that are separate from each other. And that could be, you know, if you think about the Oaks Mall, if it's mixed use, you could actually have a portion that is just commercial and then a whole other portion that is just residential, and that works just fine within the land use designation. And so that was why we ended up thinking about it that way. But again, the concentration in the 8% of the city was really based on the feedback we'd received from the public and not adding multifamily immediately adjacent or within the single family neighborhoods.
I see. Okay. Yeah, just because, well, my thinking is like, you have all these parcels and they have the opportunity to get developed when there's more density, because it's pretty hard to take a single family home and build, you know, 4 units, but it becomes economically viable when you can put 9 units on there or something, you know. There's like, because I believe if you go from neighborhood medium high to neighborhood high, there's like a 50% increase in the units allocated per acre.
It's maximum 20 to maximum 30.
Right, for medium high?
Yeah, medium high, I believe, is 20, maximum of 20 units an acre, and neighborhood high is, I believe, a maximum of 30. Did I get that right? Or did I mess those numbers up, Simran and Melissa? I might have messed those numbers up.
I think, yeah, I think I saw
but you know, Kyla, you know, I will say that, you know, we didn't hear a lot of comments from the community about wanting to add multifamily into the single family areas, which is why we, you know, why the alternatives look the way that they do. So, you know, we heard some tonight about allowing some multifamily, or, you know, up to 15 units an acre and keeping it the way it is. I think Becca had that as a comment, but we didn't hear a lot in the process earlier.
I see.
Okay.
I can share
Karen.
the density table if you want to look at that.
Yeah, actually, if you want to do that, Karen, you want to
Yeah, I was trying to
Karen Wilburn.
stay away from specific use areas, but since we have touched on some of them, I'd like to ask the question on specifically the 36-acre lot in Newberry Park, which is part of Rancho Caneo, south of the freeway that is bordered by the 101 and Alice Street.
We call it the Slipper.
The flip.
It looks like a slipper.
Those of us in the area call it Lake Newberry, just so you know. Just how did this particular plot of land get picked out as possibly being multifamily or mixed use? I mean, it is completely surrounded by single family homes. There are people that have lived here 20, 25 years that multifamily mixed use is going to impact views of the mountains. There are only 2 access roads to get to that lot. How did we ever get to this point of trying to of considering taking this out of the current zoning? It makes no.
Well, so there are advantages to that. You know, first, we had heard some in the process about that parcel and considering mixed use on that parcel. The second is that there are advantages to it from a housing perspective, because it's not necessarily that the entire thing would be at that scale, that there's an opportunity for multiple scales of residential, with putting higher density residential adjacent and nearer to the freeway and nearer to the commercial areas, and tapering down to lower density residential areas. You know, I think you're absolutely right that 2 ways of access is a problem there, and it would certainly have to increase access for anything really to happen there. But again,
there is no place to build increased access. I will tell you that there is no place other than maybe bulldozing the IHOP on Borchard and having the access there. But as far as, you know, you've got to go down Alice to get to that lot, or come down around another corner of Bella, and it's just, I'll be honest, a lot of the other stuff looked great. To me, this just seems ludicrous.
Fair,
I
fair
just
enough.
don't understand how you want to put this kind of thing smack in the middle of what has been strictly a residential neighborhood for 30 plus years.
Yeah, no, I think a couple of things were happening, and I think it's a fair point, and I think you should definitely add that in the comments to the briefing book, and we will certainly take that into consideration. I think one of the challenges that that maybe we could have done a little better with this is we could have put scale density on it, where a portion was where we had that sort of tapering of density, which probably closer reflects what could ultimately be there. In terms of that vision, so that you don't have a whole series of 4-story buildings right up against single-family residential neighborhoods. So I think that's certainly, it's a valid comment, it's a valid point, and access is definitely an issue on that parcel. We've looked at that a little bit as well. But please put the comment in there. I mean, we don't claim that everything that we've done in here is correct, and that's why it's really for discussion, and we want to hear what the comments are.
Yeah, I'll also add the general plan will have policies for ensuring that there's adequate transition down to the single family neighborhoods when you do have taller buildings next to single family homes. So there would be the higher setbacks, there would be step down so that privacy is maintained and views are maintained by the way the buildings are designed. Now, the actual implementation of that comes through the zoning code, but the overall policies that require that will be in the general plan.
Yeah, you can't do that in that lot because they're going to have to put 15 feet of fill dirt in that lot just to pull it out of the floodplain. So even a two-story single-family home is going to impede the view of the people already living there. But reasonably speaking, that's already zoned for single-family homes. So it's kind of like, my rule is always, you don't buy a piece of property next to an airport and complain about the noise. But when I bought my house 20 years ago, I was assured this was single-family homes. I did not buy my house to have 3- and 4-story buildings impeding my view 20 years later. I know somebody just bought a house at the end of Alice, and I got this horrible feeling that if this ends up going through, the people that sold that house are going to be embroiled in a lawsuit with the people that just built the house that have no idea that their house sits on a corner where there is potential for 4-story buildings now. So I just seem so ludicrous. The developer's been trying to build on this lot for 30 years, has not been able to make it affordable because there's so much mitigation that's going to have to be done in order to bring this out of the floodplain. It's in a flood zone B right now. So I really didn't understand the thinking that it was even considered as an alternative. It just seems like it should have been a non-starter from the very beginning and just stayed as single family, because I didn't see any other place within any of the areas of change where you impacted so heavily what is strictly a residential neighborhood. Everything else is already commercial retail areas. This is strictly a residential neighborhood that is going to be completely impacted.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate the comment with that and the thoughts associated with it. It is absolutely a unique parcel in the city, without question. It's rare to have a 30+ acre parcel like that in the city. So, it absolutely is unique. And I think, you're absolutely right. It warrants some more thought on exactly what can happen there. And, maybe even a little bit more detailed thinking and concepts in the plan itself, rather than just a color on the map.
Thank you.
So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're about 10 minutes over. I think we should probably wrap up here, unless anyone has any final pressing questions. Any final pressing questions? You guys you're all the troopers here who have stuck this out to the end. I appreciate everyone. This was a great conversation. I mean, we understand that the February 2nd meeting was a lot of presenting at you with not really any time at all to talk. And so that's why we had these office hours And we really appreciate that we can actually have a more informal conversation with folks. So we have 3 more of these. Please, all of you, tell all of your friends and neighbors and acquaintances about the survey. Have them come to to one of these next open houses. If you have suggestions of how we can reach out to more people, definitely send an email. And again, please keep the comments coming, because you know, we take a stab at this, at the alternatives based on what we've heard so far, and now's the time for feedback.
Is there any chance of getting an extension on that 3-1 for the survey? Because that really was a pretty short time frame for such a major, you know, it's a 60-page book, and look at this, we've only got 20 people in this meeting here tonight. So trying to, you know, get people, you know, to understand what's going on and respond within 2.5, 3 weeks, I thought was maybe a little short.
Yeah, so we are going to have to keep the survey to that time, but again, this is not the end of the public discourse on this. And so, you know, keep that in mind, because it goes, you know, there's time afterwards. It goes to the Planning Commission, it goes to the City Council, and then even after that, there's probably going to be some tweaking after that, and there's certainly going to be a lot of conversation about a lot of topics. So I understand you know, it's only a month, but just know this isn't the end here. It's just the conversation will continue. Okay. All right, everyone. Well, thank you all. Have a good evening, a good holiday weekend, and tell all your friends to come to the next meetings.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.